My name is Angela Torres. I'm 30 years old, and I had just endured the most brutal family confrontation of my life when my mother Carmen hissed, "You live off us like a leech," while my sister Monica nodded in agreement, both of them accusing me of being ungrateful for everything the family gives you, despite my success as a nurse practitioner who had dedicated my career to healing others and building financial independence. What made this accusation infinitely more devastating was that I had been secretly paying every single one of their living expenses for the past 3 years: rent, utilities, groceries, car payments, and even Monica's community college tuition, while enduring constant criticism for supposedly abandoning family values by choosing career advancement over traditional domestic roles they expected me to fulfill. What my mother and sister didn't know was that their righteous anger about my supposed selfishness and dependency was about to be shattered by the most humiliating financial reality check in our family's history, because the banking records on my phone would prove that the daughter they called a parasite was actually the sole provider keeping their entire household afloat, while they lived comfortably off the income generated by the career they constantly mocked and criticized. The family dynamics that had shaped my adult relationship with my mother Carmen and sister Monica were rooted in cultural expectations and traditional gender roles that positioned my career success as evidence of moral failure, rather than recognizing my achievements as contributions that benefited our entire family's well-being and financial stability. Growing up in a Mexican-American household where family loyalty was considered the highest virtue, I had been taught that successful women should prioritize supporting relatives over personal ambition, making my decision to pursue nursing education and career advancement a source of ongoing family tension and disappointment. Angela always thought she was too good for the family, Carmen would tell neighbors and relatives, describing my educational achievements and professional success as arrogance rather than accomplishments that reflected years of dedication, hard work, and sacrifice that had created opportunities for upward mobility. My path to becoming a nurse practitioner had required 7 years of intensive education, clinical training, and professional development that often conflicted with family gatherings, social events, and traditional celebrations that Carmen and Monica viewed as essential expressions of cultural identity and family commitment. "Education is fine, but family comes first," Carmen would lecture whenever my work schedule or continuing education requirements prevented me from attending quinceañeras, baptisms, or weekend barbecues that she considered more important than the career development that was generating the income to support our household expenses. The cultural tension between individual achievement and collective family responsibility had been complicated by Carmen's unemployment situation, which began 3 years ago when the retail store where she worked closed due to corporate restructuring, leaving her without income or immediate prospects for comparable employment. Initially, Carmen's job loss had seemed like a temporary setback that would be resolved through unemployment benefits and job searching, but her age, limited English proficiency, and reluctance to pursue retraining programs had made finding new employment increasingly difficult in a competitive job market. "The economy is terrible for people like me," Carmen would explain to justify her extended unemployment, "and employers discriminate against older workers who don't have college degrees or perfect English skills." Atai. While Carmen's challenges were real, her response to unemployment had been passive resignation rather than active adaptation, as she settled into a routine of daytime television, neighborhood gossip, and criticism of my work schedule that kept me away from home during evening and weekend family time. Monica's situation was similarly complicated by her pattern of part-time employment that generated minimal income while she attended community college classes sporadically, without clear academic goals or career direction that might lead to financial independence or meaningful contribution to household expenses. "Monica is still figuring out what she wants to do with her life," Carmen would say defensively when relatives questioned why a 27-year-old was still living at home without full-time employment, "and she needs family support while she explores different educational and career possibilities." The family support that Monica required had evolved into comprehensive financial subsidization of her lifestyle choices, including tuition payments, textbooks, transportation, personal expenses, and entertainment costs that far exceeded what her part-time waitressing income could cover independently. But while I was watching my mother and sister struggle with employment challenges and educational expenses, I was also building a successful nursing career that had progressed from hospital floor nurse to specialized emergency medicine to my current position as a nurse practitioner with prescriptive authority and clinical independence. The financial success that accompanied my professional advancement had created opportunities to help family members without creating dependency relationships. But Carmen and Monica's inability to manage their finances responsibly had gradually transformed my assistance from occasional help into comprehensive household support. "We're going through a difficult period," Carmen had explained when she first asked for help with rent payments. "But this is temporary assistance until I find new employment and get back on my feet financially." The temporary assistance had begun with covering 1 month's rent during Carmen's initial unemployment period, then expanded to include utility bills when her job search extended longer than expected, followed by grocery support when unemployment benefits proved insufficient for basic living expenses. Within 6 months of Carmen's job loss, I was essentially subsidizing the entire household budget while maintaining my own apartment, professional expenses, and career development costs that included continuing education, certification renewals, and advanced training programs required for nurse practitioner licensure. The decision to maintain my independent living situation while supporting my mother and sister had been both practical and necessary for my professional success because my work schedule included irregular hours, on-call responsibilities, and study requirements that were incompatible with the family dynamics and expectations that characterized Carmen's household. "Angela thinks she's too good to live with family," Monica would complain to relatives. "She has her fancy apartment while we struggle here, and she only visits when she feels like it." The characterization of my independent living as evidence of superiority rather than professional necessity revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that shaped my family's perception of my choices and their expectations about my obligations to provide support while accepting criticism. My financial contributions to household expenses had been structured as automatic transfers and direct payments to avoid creating monthly confrontations about money. But this discretionary system had also made my support invisible to family members who benefited from services without connecting them to my income. "The rent gets paid automatically," Carmen would tell people who asked about her financial situation. "And utility companies have payment arrangements that keep services connected." The vague explanations about automatic payments and payment arrangements allowed Carmen to maintain social dignity while avoiding acknowledgement of her complete financial dependence on the daughter she consistently criticized for not prioritizing family relationships over career advancement. But the invisibility of my financial contributions had also created space for Carmen and Monica to develop narratives about our family relationships that positioned me as selfish and ungrateful, while portraying themselves as generous providers of emotional support and cultural guidance that I was supposedly exploiting without reciprocation. "Angela takes advantage of our love and support," Monica would tell friends, "but she never gives anything back to the family except criticism about our choices and judgment about our lifestyle." The irony that they were accusing me of exploitation while living entirely off my income was becoming more apparent to extended family members who understood our household economics. But Carmen and Monica seemed to have convinced themselves that their criticism and emotional labor constituted valuable contributions that balanced our relationship. Have you ever been accused of taking from people while you were secretly providing everything they needed to survive? That's exactly what I was experiencing as my mother and sister developed elaborate justifications for their resentment, while remaining completely dependent on the career success they claimed to disapprove of. The confrontation that would finally expose the truth about our family's financial reality was approaching, and their accusations of selfishness were about to collide with banking records that told a very different story about who was supporting whom in our complicated relationship. The escalating family tension that would culminate in the most devastating confrontation of our relationship had been building for months, as Carmen and Monica's criticism of my lifestyle choices became increasingly personal and vindictive. revealing their deep resentment of my professional success and financial independence while they remained oblivious to their complete dependence on my income. The specific incident that triggered our explosive argument was my decision to miss Carmen's birthday barbecue because I had been called in to cover an emergency shift at the clinic, where a colleague's family emergency had left us short-staffed during a busy weekend when several patients needed urgent care that couldn't be postponed. "Angela is always putting work before family," Monica had complained when I called to explain that I wouldn't be able to attend the celebration. "She thinks her job is more important than showing up for people who love her." Carmen's response to my work obligation had been even more hostile, as she interpreted my professional responsibility as deliberate disrespect for her birthday celebration and evidence of my ongoing rejection of family values and priorities. 30 years I raised you, and you can't even take one day off work to celebrate your mother's birthday," Carmen had said during our phone conversation, her voice filled with hurt and anger that made me feel guilty, despite knowing that emergency medical coverage was literally a matter of patient safety. The birthday barbecue proceeded without me, but the social media posts from family members showed an elaborate celebration with expensive decorations, catered food, professional photography, and entertainment that had clearly cost far more than Carmen and Monica could afford on their limited incomes. "Beautiful celebration for our amazing mother," Monica had posted alongside photos of the party setup. "Some family members were too busy to show up, but the people who really care made sure Mom felt loved and appreciated." The passive-aggressive social media content was obviously directed at me, but it also revealed the financial contradiction of unemployed family members hosting expensive celebrations while simultaneously complaining about money problems and asking for assistance with basic living expenses. When I arrived at Carmen's house the following evening to deliver the birthday gift I had purchased, an expensive jewelry set she had admired for months, I walked into an ambush that had been planned to maximize my guilt and shame about missing the barbecue for work obligations. "Look who finally decided to visit the family," Monica said sarcastically as I entered the living room where she and Carmen were sitting with several relatives who had apparently stayed after the birthday celebration to discuss my absence and its implications for family relationships. "We were just talking about how some people think work is more important than family," Carmen added, her tone cold and accusatory as she made it clear that my arrival was interrupting a conversation about my character flaws and priorities. The atmosphere in the room was hostile and judgmental, with several family members looking at me with expressions of disappointment and disapproval that suggested they had been hearing extended complaints about my selfishness and lack of commitment to family obligations. "Tia Carmen was telling us how you never help with family expenses," my cousin Lisa said, apparently believing that I was financially irresponsible while observing the expensive decorations and catering remnants from the birthday celebration I had unknowingly funded. "Angela lives in her fancy apartment while we struggle to pay bills," Monica continued, building on the narrative that portrayed me as privileged and selfish while they faced financial hardship that I was supposedly ignoring or contributing to through my independence. The accusations were becoming increasingly specific and personal, with family members sharing stories about my perceived selfishness that had clearly been discussed and reinforced through multiple conversations designed to establish collective disapproval of my lifestyle and choices. "She comes here when she wants something," Carmen said, looking directly at me with an expression of contempt that shocked me with its intensity. "But she never gives anything back to the family that raised her and supported her through everything." The claim that I never gave anything back while I was literally funding their entire lifestyle was so absurd that I initially thought Carmen was joking or testing my reaction, but her serious expression and the nodding agreement from other family members made it clear that this was their genuine belief about our relationship. "You live off us like a leech," Carmen continued, her voice rising with anger and resentment that had apparently been building for months. "Taking our emotional support and family connection without contributing anything real to help with our problems." The word leech hit me like a physical blow, because it revealed how completely my mother had rewritten the story of our family's finances in her mind, transforming the daughter who was funding her lifestyle into a parasite who was exploiting family relationships for personal benefit. "Everything we give you," Monica added, emboldened by Carmen's attack. And you can't even show up for important family celebrations because you're too busy making money for yourself instead of caring about people who love you. The irony that they were accusing me of selfishness while literally living off my income was so profound that I struggled to find words to respond, because their accusations revealed a level of self-deception and ingratitude that I had never imagined possible. "You're ungrateful for everything the family gives you," Carmen concluded, apparently speaking for the assembled relatives who were witnessing what they believed was justified criticism of my character and priorities. But as I looked around the room at family members who were nodding in agreement with accusations that I was financially dependent on people whose rent, utilities, food, and entertainment I was secretly funding, I realized that their perception of reality was so distorted that only concrete evidence could penetrate their delusions about who was supporting whom. The banking app on my phone contained 3 years of financial records that would destroy their narrative about family relationships and force them to confront the truth about their complete dependence on the daughter they were calling a parasite. Have you ever been accused of taking from people while secretly providing everything they needed to survive, to the point where they genuinely believed you were exploiting them? That's exactly what I was experiencing as my family's financial delusions reached a level that required immediate correction through undeniable evidence. Their accusations of dependency were about to collide with bank statements that would reveal the most humiliating truth about who was actually leeching off whom in our family relationship. The moment of devastating clarity that would permanently alter my family's understanding of our financial relationship began when I realized that Carmen and Monica had become so committed to their narrative of my selfishness that they genuinely believed I was exploiting them while they struggled to provide me with support and guidance. Standing in that living room surrounded by relatives who were nodding in agreement with accusations that I was ungrateful and dependent, I understood that 3 years of invisible financial support had allowed my mother and sister to completely rewrite history in their minds, transforming themselves from beneficiaries into providers of my supposed lifestyle. "You want to know what I contribute to this family?" I said quietly, pulling out my phone with hands that were shaking from anger and disbelief at the magnitude of their self-deception and ingratitude. The shift in my tone created immediate tension in the room, as family members sensed that their intervention was about to take an unexpected direction that might challenge their collective judgment about my character and family obligations. "Let me show you exactly what kind of leech I am," I continued, opening my banking app while family members watched with expressions of curiosity mixed with concern about what evidence I might be preparing to present. The first screen I displayed showed my automatic monthly transfer to Carmen's checking account, $1,900, scheduled to process every first of the month, with a transaction history dating back 36 months to the beginning of her unemployment period. "This is the monthly transfer I make to Mom's account," I announced, holding up my phone so everyone could see the banking records that documented my financial support. $1,900 every month for 3 years to cover rent, utilities, and living expenses. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening, as Carmen and Monica stared at the screen showing financial evidence that contradicted everything they had been saying about my lack of contribution to family expenses and household support. "That's impossible," Monica whispered, apparently struggling to process information that destroyed her understanding of our family's financial dynamics. "Mom pays for everything herself from her savings and unemployment benefits." "Mom doesn't have savings or unemployment benefits anymore," I replied, scrolling through additional bank records that would systematically destroy every aspect of their delusion about financial independence. "And she hasn't had them for over 2 years. The comprehensive banking history on my phone revealed the scope of financial support that I had been providing while they criticized my selfishness, including direct payments to landlords, utility companies, grocery delivery services, and educational institutions that had kept their lifestyle functioning normally. "Rent payments to Westside Property Management," I read from my transaction history. $1,200 monthly for 36 months, paid directly from my account because Mom's credit was too damaged to maintain the lease independently. Carmen's face was turning pale as she began to understand that her housing security had been dependent on my income rather than her own financial management, making her accusations of exploitation particularly ironic and cruel. "Electric bill, gas bill, water bill, internet service, I continued, scrolling through utility payments that revealed the comprehensive nature of my household support, all paid automatically from my checking account, because Mom's bank account doesn't have sufficient funds to maintain basic services. The revelation that basic household services were dependent on my income was clearly shocking to relatives who had believed Carmen was managing independently while providing emotional support to her supposedly dependent daughter. Grocery deliveries from Fresh Market, I read, $250 weekly for 3 years, including special items and organic produce that cost significantly more than basic food assistance would provide. Monica's face was showing growing panic as she began to calculate the financial implications of my revelations and understand that her comfortable lifestyle had been subsidized by the sister she had been calling selfish and ungrateful. Car insurance, car payments, registration fees, and maintenance costs, I continued, for both vehicles in this household, paid through my insurance policy because Mom couldn't qualify for coverage independently. The automotive expenses that I had been covering revealed another layer of financial support that Carmen and Monica had been taking for granted while developing their narrative about my lack of contribution to family needs. Community college tuition for Monica Torres, I read from educational payment records, $3,200 per semester for 6 semesters, plus textbooks, lab fees, and parking permits that total an additional $800 per term. Monica's education, which she had been using as evidence of her productive use of time and family investment in her future, was revealed as another aspect of my financial support that she had apparently forgotten or deliberately ignored while criticizing my priorities. Medical insurance premiums, dental coverage, prescription costs, and emergency room visits, I continued, reading from health-related expenses that demonstrated the comprehensive scope of my support. Because neither Mom nor Monica qualifies for affordable healthcare coverage independently. The medical expenses that I had been covering included treatments, medications, and preventive care that had maintained their health and well-being while they remained unaware of the financial source of their healthcare security. Entertainment expenses, dining out, birthday celebrations, and holiday gifts, I concluded, showing payments for social activities and celebrations that had enhanced their quality of life while they criticized my absence from events I was unknowingly funding. The room had become completely silent as family members processed the overwhelming evidence that every aspect of Carmen and Monica's lifestyle had been dependent on my income, while they maintained narratives about their independence and my selfishness. Total financial support over 3 years, I announced, showing the calculated sum of my contributions, $68,400 in direct payments, transfers, and expenses that have maintained this household while I was supposedly leeching off your emotional support. Dursawayat. The mathematical reality of nearly $70,000 in financial support was clearly shocking to relatives who had been listening to complaints about my lack of contribution while observing lifestyle choices that seemed inconsistent with unemployment and part-time work income. Carmen was staring at my phone with an expression of disbelief and growing horror as she began to understand that her 3 years of unemployment had been completely subsidized by the daughter she had been calling ungrateful and dependent. Monica was crying as she processed the revelation that her college education, housing, food, transportation, and entertainment had been funded by the sister she had been criticizing for selfishness and lack of family commitment. Have you ever revealed financial truth so devastating that it completely destroyed the narrative toxic people had built about their relationship with you? The silence in that room was the sound of years of self-deception colliding with undeniable evidence about who was actually supporting whom. Their accusations of exploitation were dissolving into the humiliating reality that they had been living entirely off the income generated by the career they had been mocking and the daughter they had been emotionally abusing while calling her a parasite. The immediate aftermath of my financial revelation created a crisis of understanding that forced Carmen and Monica to confront the reality of their complete dependence on the daughter they had been systematically emotionally abusing while accusing her of exploitation and ingratitude. Carmen's reaction to discovering that her entire lifestyle had been subsidized by my income was initially denial and disbelief. as if the banking records on my phone were somehow fabricated or misrepresented rather than accurate documentation of 3 years of comprehensive financial support. "This can't be right," Carmen whispered, staring at transaction histories that showed monthly transfers, utility payments, and household expenses that totaled more money than she had earned in the 3 years since losing her job. "I manage my own finances and pay my own bills. You haven't paid a bill in 3 years," I replied, showing her detailed records of every payment that had kept her household functioning, while she remained unaware of the financial source of her stability and comfort. The cognitive dissonance between Carmen's self-perception as an independent woman providing support to her ungrateful daughter and the reality of her complete financial dependence was creating visible psychological distress as she struggled to reconcile contradictory versions of our relationship. Monica's response was more immediate and emotional, as she began crying while calculating the implications of losing financial support that had enabled her lifestyle, education, and future planning, while she had been criticizing the source of her security. "I didn't know," Monica sobbed. "I thought Mom was handling everything with her savings and unemployment. I had no idea you were paying for my college or any of the household expenses." "You didn't know because you never asked where the money came from," I replied. "You just assumed that your comfortable lifestyle was sustainable on part-time waitressing income and unemployment benefits that ended 18 months ago." The revelation that unemployment benefits had expired while their lifestyle remained unchanged was particularly shocking to Monica, who had apparently never questioned the financial logistics of maintaining expensive habits on minimal documented income. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of their realization was understanding that their emotional abuse and criticism had been directed at the person who was literally keeping them alive and comfortable, making their behavior not just ungrateful, but actively hostile toward their own survival. "We called you selfish," Carmen said quietly, her voice breaking as she began to process the magnitude of her misjudgment, "while you were giving us everything we needed to live comfortably." "You called me a leech," I corrected, "while I was providing $68,000 in support that enabled you to maintain housing, utilities, food, transportation, healthcare, education, and entertainment, without any contribution from your own income or efforts." The specific dollar amount of my contribution was clearly shocking to family members who had been listening to Carmen and Monica's complaints about my selfishness while observing lifestyle choices that required substantial financial resources. "How could we not know about this?" asked my Aunt Rosa, who was beginning to understand that the family intervention she had supported was based on completely false information about our financial relationship. "Because I structured the payments to preserve their dignity," I explained. "Automatic transfers and direct payments to vendors so they wouldn't have to ask for money or acknowledge their dependence on my income. The discretionary nature of my support system had been designed to protect Carmen and Monica from embarrassment about unemployment and financial struggles, but it had also allowed them to develop delusions about their independence that justified their emotional abuse. "You let us call you ungrateful while you were supporting everything," Monica realized, her crying intensifying as she understood the cruelty of their behavior toward someone who had been providing comprehensive care. "How could you tolerate us treating you so badly?" "I thought family relationships required sacrifice and patience," I replied. But I was confusing generosity with enabling abuse from people who convinced themselves that exploitation was normal because they weren't aware of being exploited. The distinction between voluntary generosity and involuntary exploitation was beginning to penetrate their understanding, as Carmen and Monica realized that their comfortable lifestyle had been dependent on my willingness to tolerate emotional abuse while providing financial support. "What happens now?" Carmen asked quietly, apparently beginning to understand that their revelation about my financial contributions might have consequences for their continued security and lifestyle maintenance. "Now you understand that the daughter you called a leech has been providing everything you needed to survive comfortably," I replied, while enduring constant criticism for supposedly taking advantage of family relationships. The role reversal was complete, as Carmen and Monica began to understand that their accusations of dependency had been psychological projection that revealed their own financial parasitism while attacking the person who was actually providing comprehensive support. "We need to apologize," Monica said desperately, "and figure out how to make this right between us as a family." "Apologies don't undo 3 years of emotional abuse based on complete misunderstanding of who was supporting whom," I replied. "And making this right requires acknowledging that your comfortable lifestyle exists because of my career success, not despite it." The family members who had witnessed the financial revelation were clearly uncomfortable with the implications of what they had learned, as they realized they had participated in criticizing someone who was actually providing extraordinary generosity while tolerating systematic abuse. "Angela has been incredibly generous," my Aunt Rosa admitted, "and we owe her an apology for supporting criticism that was completely unfair and based on false information about the family's financial situation." But while extended family members were beginning to acknowledge their misjudgment, Carmen and Monica were still processing the practical implications of learning that their financial security was entirely dependent on maintaining positive relationships with the daughter they had been systematically abusing. "You're not going to stop the payments because of this argument, are you?" Carmen asked anxiously, revealing that her concern was more about maintaining financial support than understanding the moral implications of their behavior. The question exposed that Carmen's primary worry was about losing access to my resources, rather than genuine remorse about treating me cruelly while benefiting from my generosity, suggesting that her understanding of our relationship was still fundamentally exploitative. "Have you ever revealed financial truth so comprehensive that it forced toxic people to choose between acknowledging their abuse or losing the resources they had been taking for granted?" Their panic about losing my support was revealing that their remorse was motivated by financial fear rather than genuine recognition of their cruelty. But their choice between accountability and comfort was about to become much clearer, as I explained the consequences of calling someone a leech while living entirely off their generosity. The final confrontation that would determine the future of my relationship with family members who had systematically abused me while depending entirely on my financial support began when I realized that their primary concern was maintaining access to my resources, rather than understanding the moral implications of their behavior. Standing in that living room surrounded by evidence of my generosity and their ingratitude, I understood that Carmen and Monica's panic about losing financial support revealed the true nature of their remorse, which was motivated by fear of consequences rather than genuine recognition of how cruelly they had treated someone who had been keeping them comfortable and secure. "Since you've been so clear that I'm a leech who takes from the family without giving back," I announced to the assembled relatives who had witnessed both their accusations and the financial evidence that contradicted every aspect of their narrative, "I'm going to prove you right by becoming exactly what you've accused me of being." The confused expressions on their faces suggested that they didn't understand what I meant, because they were still processing the contradiction between their beliefs about our relationship and the banking records that revealed the complete opposite of their accusations. "Effective immediately, I'm canceling all automatic payments, transfers, and direct financial support," I continued, pulling out my phone to demonstrate the immediate termination of services that had maintained their lifestyle for 3 years. "So you can experience what independence actually looks like without the leech you've been supporting." The realization that I was ending all financial assistance created immediate panic as Carmen and Monica began calculating the practical implications of losing income that had subsidized every aspect of their daily existence and long-term security. "Angela, you can't stop the payments," Carmen said desperately. "We don't have any other income to cover rent, utilities, or basic living expenses. We'll lose the apartment and have nowhere to go." "You should have considered that before calling me a leech," I replied, systematically canceling automatic transfers while they watched their financial foundation disappear in real time. Because people who accuse others of exploitation while being completely dependent on them need to experience actual independence. The systematic elimination of financial support included canceling automatic rent payments to their landlord, utility company authorizations, grocery delivery services, car insurance coverage, and educational funding that would force Carmen and Monica to confront the reality of their situation without my subsidization. "Monica's college tuition payment is due next week," Carmen pleaded, and if it's not paid, she'll lose her enrollment and have to start over at a different school that might not accept her credits. Monica should have thought about tuition payments before she called me selfish and ungrateful, I replied. Because students who criticize the people funding their education need to find alternative financing for their academic goals. The immediate practical consequences of losing my support were becoming apparent to family members who had been living with expenses and lifestyle choices that were completely unsustainable without external subsidization they hadn't acknowledged or appreciated. "Where are we supposed to get money for rent and utilities?" Monica asked frantically. "We don't have savings or income that can replace what you were providing." "That's exactly the point," I replied. "You've been living off my income while convincing yourselves that you were independent, and I was dependent on your emotional support." The role reversal was forcing Carmen and Monica to confront the difference between actual independence and subsidized comfort, as they began to understand that their lifestyle had been artificial and unsustainable, without continued financial exploitation of the daughter they had been emotionally abusing. "We made a mistake," Carmen admitted. "But you can't punish us by making us homeless and destroying Monica's education over one family argument." "This wasn't one argument," I corrected. "This was 3 years of systematic emotional abuse directed at the person who was providing everything you needed to live comfortably while you developed elaborate fantasies about being independent providers." The distinction between isolated conflict and systematic abuse was important, because Carmen and Monica's treatment of me had been consistently cruel and exploitative, rather than occasional disagreements that could be resolved through apology and reconciliation. "What do you want from us?" Monica asked desperately. "We'll acknowledge that you've been supporting us financially, and we'll stop criticizing your career and lifestyle choices. I want you to experience what your life looks like without the leech you've been exploiting," I replied, "so you can understand the difference between genuine independence and living off someone else's generosity while calling them parasitic. The educational value of experiencing actual financial independence would teach Carmen and Monica lessons about gratitude, self-sufficiency, and family relationships that years of subsidized comfort had prevented them from learning through natural consequences. "You're destroying our lives over hurt feelings," Carmen accused, apparently still not understanding that her financial crisis was the natural consequence of alienating the person who had been preventing that crisis through invisible generosity. "I'm ending my financial support for people who called me ungrateful while living entirely off my income," I clarified, "because parasites don't deserve continued access to resources they exploit while abusing their hosts." The biological metaphor was particularly appropriate because Carmen and Monica's behavior had been literally parasitic, extracting resources while harming the source of their sustenance through emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. "We'll tell everyone what you did to us," Monica threatened, "abandoning family members and making us homeless because your feelings were hurt." "Please do tell everyone," I encouraged. "And make sure to mention the $68,000 I provided while you called me a leech, because people need to understand what kind of family members abandon someone who sacrifices everything for their comfort. The social implications of their potential complaints would actually work in my favor, because reasonable people would recognize their ingratitude and exploitation as character flaws rather than viewing my withdrawal of support as cruelty." 6 months after ending my financial support, I received updates about Carmen and Monica's adjustment to actual independence, which had been challenging but educational as they learned to manage resources, make realistic lifestyle choices, and understand the value of work and self-sufficiency. Carmen had found part-time employment at a grocery store, while Monica had increased her waitressing hours and applied for financial aid to continue her education without depending on family subsidization that she could no longer take for granted. "We understand now what you were providing," Carmen said during a careful phone conversation that suggested genuine recognition of my generosity rather than manipulation designed to restore financial support. "And we're sorry for treating you badly while you were taking care of everything." The acknowledgement was meaningful because it came after they had experienced the practical challenges of independence, rather than being motivated by immediate fear of losing resources they had been exploiting while abusing the source of their security. Have you ever forced toxic people to experience independence so they could understand the difference between giving and taking? Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to learn through natural consequences, rather than continuing to enable their abuse through misguided generosity. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that people who accuse you of being dependent while living off your support need to experience actual independence to understand who really needs whom in your relationship. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.